Welcome to Dolby Music Community Sessions. I'm Ben Guyvers with Dolby Creator Lab, based in Los Angeles. And in this month's session, we are joined by multi-Grammy award-winning engineer, producer, and musician Andrew Scheps, joining from his studio in the UK. And he will be breaking down his Dolby Atmos mixes for the album by Low Roar called House in the Woods, an album which he played on, produced, and of course mixed in stereo and Atmos. Also joining this conversation will be my colleague David Ziegler from Dolby's music team in Europe, and we're going to get into the theory and technique that Andrew used on this album and others, including his miking techniques for capture using 3D arrays by Scheps microphones. He also takes us inside his Pro Tools session for a look at how he mixed the record, including the amazing vocal performance by the late Ryan Cazaria of Low Roar. It's a really special session exploring a beautiful record, which you can find on enabled streaming services now in Dolby Atmos. And it's so awesome to have Andrew on the session, who of course has mixed for the likes of Adele, Metallica, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Michael Jackson, and so many more. Add your questions for Andrew. That's coming up. Greg Stryke Chin is here as always, this time with part 2 of his pro tips for binaural rendering. And in this follow-up session, he focuses on using the external Dolby Atmos Renderer and how you can leverage the Dolby Binaural Settings plugin with any DAW using the Dolby Atmos Renderer. So this, of course, follows part 1 from last session on using binaural with internal renderers in DAWs such as Pro Tools, Logic, Studio One, and Nuendo. And again, this month on the external renderer. So add your questions for Greg, and that is coming up next. Also quickly, in last month's session, we featured a guest conversation with Dolby's Mark Tuffy on Dolby Atmos for live applications, including live music performances at Dolby Live in Las Vegas. That's where Mark and his team have developed a fully integrated system for live music, and where acts such as Usher, Aerosmith, and Maroon 5 have performed live in Atmos. And Mark also shared the room layout and the signal path for Dolby Live. That was an awesome conversation. We also had Dolby's Jordan Glasgow sharing updates to the Dolby Atmos Renderer version 5.3.1. So check out that session and all of our previous sessions at our YouTube channel, and they're all in a dedicated playlist. All right, let's go to Greg's pro tips, and that will be followed by our conversation with Andrew Scheps. Please add your questions now. All right, so Greg Stryke Chin is here as always with his pro tips. What's up, Greg?
What's happening, Ben? How's everybody?
Good to have you, man. As always, rocking your pro tips. So this is a part 2 to last month's binaural rendering in your DAW session with internal rendering. This time you're going to show us what's up with external rendering.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Ben. Yeah. And as a quick recap, the last time we talked about, being able to get all of your binaural settings, leveraging internal rendering in those DAWs that feature that. So Pro Tools, Apple Logic Pro, Persona Studio One. We looked at Steinberg's Nuendo. And the reason I wanted to kind of show those separately is because, all of those internal renderers or rendering integrations are really meant to be very closely locked to those DAWs. So where you find the binaural settings, it differs a little bit. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on leveraging the Dolby Atmos Renderer, linking up or linked to your DAW. I'm only going to use Pro Tools today because honestly, it's going to be the same regardless of what DAW you're using, and it'll make things a little bit easier in terms of going through and listening and watching. So, jumping back into today, we have a session. This is the same session I had up, last time when we showed off binaural settings for the internal renderer. But what I've done is I've actually just kind of set it up for external renderer. So I'll just quickly kind of show you how I've set that up. Again, we're in Pro Tools. And I'm just going to quickly go into my setup menu, go to I/O, and then you can see here under my Dolby Atmos tab, we are leveraging the external renderer, and I am connected to my renderer here. And let me quickly bring that up. And there it is. So what we want to do, and of course you want to make sure that you're correctly connected, Dolby Audio Bridge out of your DAW, Dolby Audio Bridge as the input to the renderer, and then whatever your output is. For your audio I/O. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're able to make any changes to our binaural settings very easily, very quickly. How we do that is we leverage a binaural plugin, a Dolby binaural plugin to do that. Now, that plugin can be placed on any track in the session. It really doesn't matter where you put it, because it has no interaction, no specific interaction. It's really just metadata that it's pushing back, or information is pushing back to the renderer. So you can actually add it to any track in your session. Again, it won't affect any of those tracks. However, because we're all fans of good session etiquette, what I'm going to recommend we do is put that on a separate track. Now, I typically will use an auxiliary track. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull that up right here. And we're going to, it can be mono. Again, it's got no audio passing. So, but I'm going to go ahead and do a stereo aux track, create that. And where did it go? There it is right here. And I'm going to go ahead and just call this binaural. And then we're going to pull in the binaural plugin. So Dolby Atmos binaural settings right there. And then let me go ahead and close that. What I'm going to go ahead and do, you can see that I've got some folders set up here for my stems and et cetera. Again, we want to have good session etiquette. So I'm going to go ahead and move this to my Atmos tools folder. And if I open that folder up, I'll just go ahead and do that. You can see that this is where my LFE bus is, my signal test, which we've gone through before, and now my binaural settings. Now, if I open the plugin up, you can see that we are connected to the renderer. And any changes I make here, you can see that no changes have been made yet. But if I go ahead and start making some changes, I actually did a couple of already. Let's say we wanted to have object 11. We'll just go ahead and have that be near. We'll call, typically what I'll do is I'll go ahead and rename that whatever that object is from the session. So maybe that is an ARP. And then if you wanted to group it, you've got some grouping that you can do, and I'll put that as music. Go ahead and click accept. And then what we'll do is go ahead and move over to the actual renderer. And then let's go ahead and pull up the binaural render mode page. And you can see that now when I pull that page up, it's going to let me know immediately that the binaural renderer settings are being controlled by the binaural settings plugin. So you can see right here that object 11 is now been switched to near because I've done that in the plugin. The description is an ARP and it's grouped as music. Now, just to prove that there are no smoke and mirrors here, I'm going to go ahead and pull back up the plugin, and let's go ahead and change object 12 to far, and we'll call this bass drop exclamation. And which it's not, and we'll go ahead, just for the sake of the example, we'll call that dialogue. Again, it's not, but again, just to prove that this is not smoke and mirrors, I've gone ahead and click accept, and then I'll go back over to the renderer, and right here in our render mode page, you can see that information has now automatically been transferred over directly to the renderer in the binaural render mode page. Really, really easy. You click accept, you continue on with your mix, and Bob, as they say, is your proverbial uncle. And that's it. Again, very simple, but I wanted to make sure we point that out and point out the differences between internal rendering and where to find your binaural settings, and then leveraging the actual Dolby Atmos renderer connected to your DAW, and how you can leverage the binaural plugin for that. I hope that's helpful. Of course, happy to take any and all of your questions, and we'll see you next time. Ben, back to you.
Awesome stuff as always, Greg. And you can download a free 90-day trial of the Dolby Atmos Renderer, which includes the binaural settings plugin from our pro site. We'll also flash the QR up on the screen here as well. And as Greg said, you can use the external renderer with any of the DAWs really that are out there, including Ableton. So have at it. All right. Well, it's a pleasure to welcome today's guests to the Music Community Sessions. First, mixer, engineer, producer, musician, and the owner of Tonequake Records, Mr. Andrew Scheps is here, making his debut on the Music Community Sessions. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And also making his debut from Dolby's UK music team based in Germany. So pleased to welcome my fantastic colleague, Mr. David Ziegler, to the sessions. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Anytime, man. So, Andrew, let me start with you, man. It is so exciting to have you joining us to share, among other things, some of your workflow and the techniques you've used on the new Low Roar record. House in the Woods, which is really beautiful, by the way. Congratulations on that. And I'm sure many in our Dolby Music community and certainly beyond know of you and of your work. Obviously, you're a very accomplished mixer and an educator, both in stereo and Atmos. But if you could share a little bit about your background for people who, may need to get caught up a little bit and may not be as familiar with your backstory and some of the highlights that you think of in terms of the work that you've done.
Yeah, I mean, I've been making records because I'm super lucky for 30 something years. And I started off the way a lot of people do, working your way up. But I was always a geek, and I actually worked for a manufacturer who made something called the Synclavier, and you can look it up if you care. But probably what would be considered one of the first DAWs. It was a sequencer sampler, FM synthesizer, and then a hard disk recorder once that happened. So I did a lot of editing and things. And then when Pro Tools became viable, I was doing that. And at the same time, engineering smaller projects. And then when every session started to have a Pro Tools guy, and I would do that. And then some of the sessions wouldn't have a separate engineer. And so I started being able to engineer on bigger stuff. Got to work with a lot of great producers, Don Was, Rob Cavallo, Rick Rubin, for years. Got to work on some amazing, amazing music, and I'm just super lucky.
I'm curious about your history with mixing in Atmos. I mean, creatively, you speak a lot about being guided by emotion and really doing what's right to service the original song and using space and not making it distracting. And David's going to get into a lot of that with you. But it would seem like in some ways, like Atmos is perfect for that approach to mixing. Can you share a little bit about the beginnings for you with mixing in immersive and also Atmos?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that most of us who've been mixing in stereo for a long time spend time trying to make stuff sound like it's coming from outside the speakers. And, there are lots of spatialization hardware and then plugins and all that kind of stuff. I mean, Q Sound is sort of the epitome of people going off the deep end trying to make this happen. And the idea of actually having the speakers around is fantastic. And 5.1, when it started up, I was excited about it. Didn't really do too much. I did some for DVDs and things like that, but not without a visual component. And I think the real problem with it was that it was a channel-based format. And if you didn't have 5 speakers and a subwoofer, there was stuff you just weren't going to hear. And if you did have them, but they weren't laid out right, it didn't sound right. Like there were so many limitations to it. And that's what object-based mixing takes care of. So that's the first thing, is that I don't have to worry that someone has to have exactly the right setup to listen to it. There are a million different ways to hear it, and the headphone component and all of that. And so I've been doing it, I guess I set up my own room. It's got to be 6 years ago now, something like that. And it's still a learning curve. I'm still learning how to mix in stereo, but it's the first sort of 2 months or 3 months, you felt like a baby again, which was amazing to sit down in front of Pro Tools and I got a mix and I have no idea what I'm going to do. But I really feel like I'm starting to get what I can do. I mean, the technical side, it's evolving, but I feel very confident with that. But the creative side, and I think the Low Roar record is a really good example of where I feel like I've gotten to. The album, other than the strings we're going to talk about, were recorded for a stereo record. Nothing was recorded immersively except that the arrangements weren't done. And I feel pretty strongly that the Atmos version of the record is better than the stereo version. It is so all enveloping. It's amazing. And I love to be able to do that. And with the string recordings, I think there's a very good example of that. Just by having height, your sense of being somewhere is enhanced in a way that you absolutely cannot do in any other way.
Well, it's really gorgeous. And I just wanted to touch on for a moment before I hand it over to David that education is also a major element of your work. And you've hosted many Mix with the Masters sessions and Pure Mix, and you're prominent at many industry events. But when it comes to education, I think it's special that you're pretty transparent with sharing your workflow and learning, sharing what you've learned as you've gone, and the why around what you're doing in the studio to kind of really let people into your theory. So it seems like that's an important piece of your work as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to say there are 3 components, and I'm going to forget by the time I get to the third one what it was. The first is I actually just really enjoy teaching. I had a really slow time in my career at one point, and every time that's happened, I've looked for something else to do. And I started teaching a class at UCLA and loved it. And it was a classroom class about recording. We never touched a single piece of gear. And it was great. And the reason I like doing it, first of all, I just enjoy it, the process, but also there's no voodoo or magic. The magic is the way people hear stuff, and then the way they learn their tools to make what they hear actually happen for other people. And so that's the talent, is being able to hear something in your head and make it happen. But this idea that like certain pieces of gear are magically going to make everything better, and it's insane. And so I really like to just explain it. And then also, because I have a mix room in my house, and since I moved from LA, I can't have an assistant. There's nowhere for them to be. I feel like I've got an obligation to do it. You know, I think the people who know stuff have to pass it on, because it used to be just done organically because of the traditional studio system. So anybody who worked in a commercial recording studio learned stuff from everybody else in the building, whether they were on your session or not. People worked their way up, and you had to learn stuff. And now you don't. You can just watch YouTube. And, you know, some of it's going to be really, really helpful. And it doesn't have to be behind a paywall to be useful, but, you know, that stuff is curated, so it can help. But I do think that I've been given a platform, so I need to take advantage of it. And I think the workflow thing and making sure people understand how stuff works, it just empowers them. So they stop thinking like, well, if I could just afford this plugin or this microphone, then I could finally make a record. And it also puts them back in the position of having to do the work, because that's also an excuse. So it's a really good combination, and I think it's necessary.
Yeah, I love that take. Well, we're really excited to have you do it with us here today, and thank you for doing so. David, as mentioned, stoked to have you, man. I'm sure many of our community know you from your many years of work at Dolby in Europe, but maybe you can share a little intro and a bit about what you do, and go ahead and take it from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks again for the invitation. It's great to be here. Great to be part of the community sessions. Yeah, so I'm actually working for Dolby for 13 years now. I started in the cinema team. I was like one of the guys working on getting the first Dolby Atmos into cinemas back in 2012, 2013, 14, and then started working on the home entertainment side when that became a thing. Like the first studios doing audio for Netflix and streaming services. And then when music became a thing, I started joining the music team. So now my main job is actually doing similar work that what you're doing in the States, working with music labels, music producers, artist studios, but doing this in Germany. So, or in Europe, let's say, part of the European team. So it's really not limited to Europe. Yeah, so it's really great to be here and talk to you, Andrew, as well. I mean, Andrew, I know you from a lot of your YouTube videos and from interviews and conversations. So it's great to actually have a conversation with you in person this time. Yeah, it's great talking about this album. We wanted to talk about the album from Low Raw in the Woods, and I actually wanted to ask you about the band, actually, about Low Raw. I saw that you have actually worked on all of the albums with Low Raw. So how did this collaboration came to be in the first place?
Well, I mean, really, Low Roar was Ryan Carazia, who's an amazing singer, and I worked with him in a band called Audrey Sessions, which he was in long before Low Roar ever existed. And I mixed a record for them, and in the process ended up producing a few songs. And then Ryan and I just really got each other. It was just sort of an instant, easy collaboration between the two of us. And then he moved to Iceland, as you do, and he started writing songs there. And we had talked about him having his own project, and he had this idea of kind of the emotions he wanted the project to have, but he hadn't started writing any music for it. And that's what he did in Iceland. And he started sending me songs, and they were fantastic. And so we put the first record together. He worked with a few people there. And then he and I finished the record together. And then I started my label to put the record out. And so it's just been us from the very beginning. And then in the second record, he worked with a producer, an English producer who was living in Reykjavik and had a studio there called Mike Lindsay, who's amazing. And basically the three of us have made every Low Roar record since then. But it would always be Ryan writing, Ryan playing the core instruments and singing, and then it would go through Mike and me to be finished. And some of the records we actually all got in a room. Well, one of the records we all got in a room. There have been quite a few records where Ryan does stuff, he sends it to Mike, Mike does stuff, he sends it to me, I do stuff, and then the record's done. And what's great is we've got three people who are all very different, but we all love what each other does on the music. We've almost never had a conversation about like, well, I don't like what you did there, or I don't get it. It's been more like, oh, well, you know, maybe the one thing you did is covering up this other thing. And then when you listen that way, it's obvious. So we all have a completely different record in our heads, but it's exactly the same record, if that makes any sense. So it's for me, I mean, I'll never have another project like it. And I like to say it's the closest I'll ever be to being in a band, which is true. And Ryan incredibly generously, every record just says Low Roar is Ryan and Andrew, and then Ryan, Mike, and Andrew. So yeah, really, really special project. And then this last album, House in the Woods, Ryan had recorded everything that he was going to record for the record, and it had gone to Mike. Mike had worked on stuff. They went back and forth, and Mike had just sent it to me a couple months before Ryan got sick, and then he died a couple of years ago, about 2.5 years ago now. So I was about to start working on the record, and then obviously I couldn't work on it. I mean, it just sat on my hard drive for about a year, and then I started listening every once in a while, and then about 6 months later, I started really digging into the record, and it's a beautiful record. Lots of his songs are very sad, and he would talk about death. There's no, premonition or anything like that. This is just the next evolution of Low Roar. But it's a very enveloping record. And I think, I took incredibly great care with all of the records, but I'd also have Ryan calling me every single day saying, play me something. And I always knew it was going to go back and forth, even though most of the time it was like, yep, that's great. It wasn't, that things needed to be edited or changed. But with this record, obviously Ryan wasn't there. So it became, I don't know, it was amazing to work on, but it was also terrifying because I don't know if I'm getting it right. And the good thing is that the Low Roar fans have pretty much said that we got it right. They love the record. So, and his fan base is just, they're so devoted to him. It's amazing. So, and we did Atmos listening events I'm just going to talk a lot and then, you'll see. So we did Atmos listening events for when the record came out. And I went back through the catalog and mixed about an hour's worth of music from the previous 5 records and 1 EP in Atmos. And then we played back the entire new record in Atmos. And it was incredible. There are people crying during it. There were people who flew in from Colorado to come to London for 3 hours. So it was, and it was exactly what we hoped. And to hear that stuff in Atmos, I think for the catalog stuff too, I mean, his fans to hear that for the first time in a room like that was just amazing. And the music lends itself to immersive mixing. And I'm working my way through the catalog and we'll do a full release of everything in Atmos as soon as I finish, basically.
Okay, that's so nice to hear this whole story, and obviously can imagine that it has to be very emotional picking up these records again after some time when you feel like you are ready to continue working on them. And what was your approach then? How could you decide what to do with them?
The way I approach every Atmos mix, if I can, is if I've mixed it in stereo, I will go back to my stereo session and I basically make a new multitrack. I bounce every single element through the mix bus as a stereo stem because that's just the easy way to do it. And then I've got, I printed 3 songs this morning and it was 221 mix passes across the 3 songs. So I'm averaging 70 stems per song. So it is a new multitrack. And then the offshoot of this, which has turned out to be really great, is now I have an archival version of the song that is 70 stereo wave files in a folder that all you got to do is line them up and hit play and you've got the mix. And that's something that we're finding trying to mix catalog stuff that labels don't have. Sometimes they can't even find the multi-track. But in general, recalling mixes is not a thing for older stuff mixed on consoles and mixed on old versions of Pro Tools. Like there are all kinds of things with it. So I started the process for the Atmos mixes, and then it's got this great sort of side effect of being archival. And then I just have a Atmos template that I use, and like going through the low roar catalog, it's as if I'm starting to get to the point where almost every stereo production, once I dig into it, it's as if it was done for immersive. Some of them need to stay very front wall centric, and it's just about a little bit of space. And while someone's listening to it, they might say, well, there's nothing really going on. But if they switch to the stereo, it collapses. And so it's just a slightly more engaging version of it. But there's a ton of stuff where I thought that's going to be that kind of mix. And then I can manage to get it all over the room, and it's not distracting, and it still serves the song. But it actually kind of, the danger is you can rip apart a song very, very easily. You can ruin a song so much faster with more than two speakers than you can with two speakers. So you go in being a little bit careful, but then sometimes it can work to the point where all you've done is expose it. And so people can now live inside the song instead of just next to the song. And the low roar stuff is sort of the epitome of that. Every single song I've opened up has just turned into this amazing experience when it's on speakers. And it's not different, but it's what you thought the stereo mix was. And then you realize that actually the stereo mix is kind of the snapshot of the wraparound movie or whatever.
And for this project, you actually re-recorded using a microphone array, as I understand it?
Yeah, not re-recorded. So one of the things, a lot of the low roar records have strings on them. Got really lucky on the second record to work with Amina, which is an Icelandic string quartet. They've worked with Sigur and a bunch of other bands. Really talented. There's some people from the Bay Area in the States where Ryan was from and where he was during Audrey's sessions. So some people who've played. And I knew that this record needed strings on two songs. Originally, I thought it would be more, but once I got into it and I did the kind of stuff that I usually do with harmonium, and I started to take care of some of that, but there were two songs in particular that absolutely needed strings. And so I, at that point, had met Hyung-Kook Lee, who's from the University of Huddersfield, who's done probably more research into recording techniques, but also perception of immersive recordings than anybody else on the planet. And he's a great engineer. And so he's come up with a few different microphone arrays. And I heard an organ recital that he recorded during an AES immersive conference. And the playback of the recital was better than it sounded in the church that we heard it in, which should be absolutely impossible. But it was insane how great it was. And I immediately thought, well, that's what I want to do. And so one of the things I've done with the array is to record the strings. So we'll have a graphic that can pop up on the screen magically to show you the array. But basically, it's an array of 11 microphones. So it's 704. And they are all Scheps microphones, unfortunately a different Scheps. Otherwise, I could have 500 of them if I wanted. And so it's left, center, right, and then sides and surround. And then there are 4 height mics, which are in the corners. So front left and right, rear left and right height. And the great thing about the array is it's small and repeatable, which makes it phase coherent. But because of the patterns of the microphones, you actually get a sense of space that's absolutely insane. Like it's incredible. So it's a 1 meter square, and the left, center, right acts kind of like a decatree. And you don't have to do it, but you can take the center microphone, put it on a little outrigger, so you get more of an arc on the left, center, right. And those are, it depends on the size of the room and the size of the thing you're recording. But for me, those are cardioid. Then the side microphones are pointing straight out, and those are hypercardioid. And also supercardioid can be used, but I'm not even remembering. Let's say mine are hypercardioid. And then the rears are also hypercardioid. And those, usually you wouldn't have them point straight back, because in a room, that's going to sound too far away. You're miking the reflections, especially in a big room, and they're coming back so late. So those usually I angle out. So the front, left, and right are angled to deal with the size of the ensemble you're recording, because of the distance you've decided you want to be from them. So that's kind of how you figure out the angles of the front, left, and right. And then the rear, left and right, it's just, well, how ambient do you want them to be? And the more you turn them towards the sides, the more they have a little bit of direct sound getting to them. Then the front, the height microphones are literally right next to the front, left, and right, rear, left, and right. And they are in the same plane. I have little tiny standoffs that have 2 mic clips on them. So the front left is there, and the top front left is there. And because these are hypercardioid, what they pick up is completely different. They're almost completely decorrelated in terms of direct sound. So it means that the phase coherence is crazy. The low end is absolutely insane. With 11 microphones, there is no microphone more than a meter from the furthest microphone, unless you go diagonally, and then it's the hypotenuse, and you figure it out. It's square root of 2 thing. But the low end is incredible, and you'd think that you would start to hear some phasiness in the upper mids, and you just don't. And I think it's the combination of patterns that makes what the microphones are picking up discrete enough that you don't notice what's going on, because you've got sound coming back from all over the room. So what's very cool is it's very portable, because the Scheps microphones are tiny. I've got 3 1-meter mic bars, so I can set this up on 3 microphone stands and a tape measure. For the string recording we did, there were 7 mic stands, because I didn't carry the mic bars. And we recorded them in a church in Paris, a Baptist church in Paris, which who knew? Apparently it's the first, and it may be the only. I don't know how many there are. But it's a beautiful wooden church. So not one of the larger stone churches you're certainly used to seeing in Paris, but a really, really beautiful sound. And I ended up with the string quartet in sort of an arc, because that's the way they like to set up. And then I was probably between 5 and 8 meters back from them, with the front, left, and right pointing just outside the arc of the quartet. And the recording was insane. I had a laptop. I had a stereo mix of the song. I had to make a click, and it was all done rubato. And when I share my screen, you'll see the tempo map. It's just ridiculous. And then I had a DAD AX Center, which is a single rack space audio interface with incredibly clean mic pre's, because that is one of the things about recording an array like this, is you need the mic pre's to sound exactly the same and be exactly the same level for it really to work. Because the point is, the only difference is the sound in the room. The capsules, regardless of pickup pattern, are basically the exact same tonality as each other, and the mic pre's are the same, and the level's the same. So the only thing that's different is the decorrelated audio getting to them. So using that interface with Thunderbolt into my laptop, I've got a tiny little system that I can bring anywhere in the world and record immersively. So we did that. We recorded the strings that way. So that was the very long answer to the question that you asked.
Very nice. Have you? It sounds like you used it afterwards on other productions.
Yeah, I used it actually right after that. I went down to Studios La Fabrique, where Mix with the Masters holds their seminars. And I just told the participants, like, hey, put together an acoustic band and learn a song, and we're going to record it. And so they were set up in a room. I set up the mic array, no other microphones, and we did acoustic balancing in the rooms. Like, you're too loud, back up. And again, it's incredible. You are in the room. And I will have audio snippets for people to listen to, binaural encoded, but I think you get it even just in the headphones. as you add microphones, and I'll show in the session, how stuff is laid out. When you listen to the front microphones, it just sounds like a really nice recording because the microphones are beautiful and that's it. You start to add the sides and then the surrounds, and it starts to feel immersive, and this is amazing. But when you turn on the height microphones, it's hard to describe. It not only is just better sounding, like you are in that acoustic space, but there's something really emotional about it. It just transports you. And it's hard to describe it. I mean, and maybe I react to it more than other people, but I find it incredible when you turn the height microphones on. And I've done that I did it for Mix of the Masters. I've done it in a couple of different seminars where play the whole thing, then start muting layers of microphones till we just get back to the front. And then when you put things back on, when you get to the rear microphones, everybody thinks like, oh yeah, we're back. And then you turn on the height mics and people kind of lose their minds. You can see it on their faces. So you can make that happen just with good Atmos mixing. But to be able to record and take advantage of that, I am believing more and more and more that height is, as hard as it is to reproduce and as hard as it is for people to actually hear it, sound coming from above that has something to do with what you're listening to at head level engages your brain in a totally different way than if it isn't there. Because your brain now perceives where you are as the space where the music is happening, not I have some speakers in my living room where other stuff is happening.
That is fascinating. Do you want to take a look at the session?
Yeah. Okay, so up here is the crazy tempo map, which made the string players nuts. I basically kind of had to they kept telling me, we're one beat off. Like, no, you're fine. That's exactly what it's supposed to be. And then I just had playback. I had a full stereo mix, and then I had a piano stem and a vocal stem because that was the easiest way to be able to follow the click. Then down here are the tracks that were recorded. So we've got 11 tracks. We've got front left, front center, front right. Then we've got the side left and right, rear left and right, and then the 4 height mics. And the beginning of the string arrangement was just harmonics. And this is how the tracks were used in the stereo mix. I thought that when I did the stereo mix, I would just use the front microphones. And then when I did the Atmos mix, I would go get the rest of the microphones. And then I realized that I'm an idiot, and that's not how to use this at all, because what you basically have is the most coherent, perfect reverb. And by changing which microphones you listen to, or even messing with the balance, you get this amazing picture of the string performance in a room that is fully customizable and is fully coherent and works in stereo. And then you can explode it out into Atmos when you have more speakers. And what that also means is that I was worried that when you listen to the binaural of the Atmos mix of the song, was everything going to sound too wet? And the answer is absolutely not, because it's exactly what I was listening to in the stereo mix. It's what matches the song anyway. So in the stereo mix, I actually decided to only use the height microphones on the harmonics because they felt too present and too direct, and you hear too much of the bow scraping the strings and all the stuff that goes along with harmonics. Whereas just hearing the height microphones, you're literally hearing string harmonics in the ceiling of a church, it's insane. It just works so well. And I'm talking about it, and we're not listening to it at the moment, but take my word for it. It's amazing. You'll listen in a minute. And then for the rest of the arrangement, I'm using them basically one track to one speaker. So they're panned exactly how they were recorded, except that I decided, because the piano and the voice were in the left and right speaker, because for this record especially, but I really like the sound of Phantom Center, I put the string left and right into the center speaker and then had the rest of them going out. And it actually was great because the strings sort of spread themselves across, because it's really weird how we're so used to Phantom Center, but if you put something just in the center, and you're sitting in the center of the room, it makes a phantom stereo. So you don't feel that the strings are only coming out of the middle. You feel like the strings are in the entire front wall, but you have the piano and the vocal completely on their own coming out of the left and right. And then the rest of the microphones just wrapping around you. And it's incredible how well it works. And it's kind of all I want to do right now is go record stuff like this.
So for the stereo version, you used all the track. You basically used all the microphones for the stereo version. Did I get that right?
But in the configuration you just saw, in the harmonics section, I only used the height microphones, and then in the larger section, yes, all the microphones folded down. I may have changed the balance a little bit. I don't even remember really, but basically, yes, it's all of the microphones.
So you're thinking of recording this way even for stereo productions, or do you even work on pure stereo productions anymore?
Yeah, I do, because it's what people can get their heads around. It's, Justin Gray has done an amazing record where everything was immersive from the very beginning. But most of the time, you just don't have that luxury, and you don't have the time, you don't have the resources. It takes a bunch of microphones. And if you're not in a good sounding space, well, now you're just miking something that sounds terrible. So you don't want to do that anyway. But I'm not convinced that it matters. It used to be that, well, if you haven't produced it for immersive, how's it going to be an immersive? And it turns out it's going to be amazing. It's going to be absolutely amazing if you get it right, even if it's only subtle. But you can go nuts with stuff if you've got source material. And this is why I bounce 70 stems per session, because I can put it all in the front. It is the mix. But instead of saying, oh, I've got, 70 tracks of background vocals and they're a stereo thing, I literally have 70 tracks of background vocals, and I can build a circle of a choir or something like that. And that's what lets a stereo production become immersive in a way that is so compelling that, like I said before, the low roar mixes, I'm convinced are better. They're better than the stereo. But the entire album was conceived for stereo. And I knew that the string recording had to work in stereo because that was the main format of the record. But as consumer playback picks up and more people can hear these things on speakers, I'm just super excited about it.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I guess you have a do you have a Dolby Atmos living room setup at home, or are you only?
I don't. I've got the Apple TV in the studio, and so that's spitting out over. It's all very complicated, but basically, I get that into Dante, and then that goes through my rig, and then I've got the equivalent of a 5.1 setup with the TV, and so that's what I use. But I do have. I have the Echo, the big Echo that does that. I've got the Sonos that does it. So I've got the smaller consumer systems that do the upfiring tweeters and figure out the adaptive acoustics. But I haven't actually put together another system just for listening because I'm an idiot. But I listen in the studio when I'm going to check it out. And my brain is finally starting to get used to the binaural render. So I can actually listen to it in headphones sometimes. You'd think after 6 years, and I spend way more than half my time mixing in Atmos in headphones. Way more. And for me, it's just a workflow that really, really works. Because I did some things starting off on speakers. Then when I got to headphones, there were things I had to take care of. But as I've gotten more used to the way things translate, if I start it in headphones, then I can come on speakers and say, oh, well, actually, that doesn't work. But it never breaks the headphones. And I've already got all my distance settings the way I want them. So the tonality is set for the headphones. But then what's going on in the speakers obviously isn't affected by that. And so my transition from headphones to speakers is usually relatively quick and super exciting because I finally get to hear it in the speakers. And then when I go back to headphones, I almost never have to change things. Every once in a while, there'll be a slight balance difference or a tonality difference if something is put up top that I will deal with. But usually I've dealt with all of that while in headphones. And it's only if I make bad choices about placement, or there's certain things when I'm going to automate that I will do it once I get on speakers, because you don't know how distracting something's going to be. And the last thing I want to do is spend a long time automating some stuff that then I'm going to get rid of.
Oh, that's an interesting approach. So you start working primarily on headphones. Then you go to speakers, have fun, and then you go back to headphones to make sure that it still works.
Yeah, and I'd say that's probably one of the main reasons why I don't use the center speaker more, because that's a much bigger difference in headphones than it is on speakers. You can get used to it on speakers pretty easily because you still get all the acoustic interference, and if you're not right in the middle, like, it makes sense. But the sound of a phantom center in headphones is very, very different to the way the center channel is binauralized. So I cheat things into the center and I use it, but I still love phantom center on stuff. It's phasey and weird, but I'm just really used to it.
You mentioned you have like 200, you printed like 270 stems today. I mean, how does that even work? How long is the song? How can you print it 270
all
times?
Right. So it's 3 songs, and it was closer to 220, I think, than 270. But I spent lockdown learning how to write code, basically. And it was, I think for anyone who mixes, printing mixes is soul destroying. It's just the worst thing in the world. And if you can afford it, you have an assistant who does it for you. So it destroys their soul instead of yours. But it still is soul destroying and accident prone. If you're printing for 7 hours straight, that's like driving a car for 7 hours straight. You have to really be on it. And you also have this thing of having to be really, really concentrated to set up the next stem. And then you sit there bored while it prints. So anyway, I wrote software and it's turned into something called Bounce Factory, which I use constantly, but it's built on a platform called SoundFlow, which is a workflow automation program that is absolutely life-changing. And then to be able to develop on top of it, I managed to build a piece of software that will open and close Pro Tools sessions, solo mute tracks, recall volume automation, switch playlists, like whatever. So instead of spending a week printing stems, I'll spend an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours on a 12-song record setting up all of the stems that need bouncing, including the mix passes as well. And then I hit bounce all and I go to sleep and I get texted to say, past 90 of 300 is done and now I'm moving on to 91. And if I come in the morning and it's not done, I can just interrupt it and then go back. So like this morning, I was out for a couple hours and I already had these things set up. Like, great, they've approved the mixes, hit go. And I got back and they were all done. And I know when I talked earlier about like, I create a new multi-track, like that just seems insane. Because if you're printing these things manually, you have really good intentions when you start. And then by the time you get down the session a little bit, guitars, stereo, like that's it. You're not breaking stuff up because you'd want to kill yourself. And so to get around that, because I'm the kind of person where if I should do something, I'll do it. And I got to the point where I realized this is how I had to print stuff and there needed to be a tool to do it. So I built it.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned that there is a catalog of low-raw albums waiting and that you were thinking of getting them into Dolby Atmos as well. Is there anything you can or want to already share about that?
Well, I mean, the idea's been in my head for years. And then when I was setting up these listening events, at first I was just going to play the new record, but I thought, well, these are really hardcore low roar fans, and I want to play them something on good speakers because they may never have heard it just on things that sound good. And then I thought, well, I'm not just going to play the stereo mixes. So I went back and did this playlist, and I did at least 2 songs from every record and 1 from the EP we put out. And the process was great. I mean, I know it better than anything else I've worked on. I love it more than anything else I've ever worked on because it's as close to me being an artist as I'll ever get. And it was amazing and cathartic to do it. So I have printed stems for all the other 5 studio records and the EP. And I literally have thousands of stems printed using Bounce Factory again. And again, that's another thing. To go back and do this would be so daunting if I couldn't automate making the stems that it would be a nightmare. But so those are all printed. I've prepped most of them. And once they're out, I mean, once I've finished them, basically, they'll just get attached to the stereo versions that are already out. And I'll announce to low roar fans that it's happening. I mean, it can't really be a release. And I don't want to make a special version of the record with like, go dig up a song that Ryan didn't really want released anyway to make an extended version. So in terms of the music services, I'm assuming it'll just happen silently. They'll just show up and be available. But the low roar community will absolutely know about it. And hopefully, there were people who'd asked me about being able to buy the Atmos mixes. And so through immersivemusicalbums.com, I think I said it right, we've actually made House in the Woods available. And I mean, I think there've only been 5 people who've bought it, but those are people who are going to go listen to it the way I'd hope people get to hear it. And so we'll do the same thing with the other 5 records in the EP. And then eventually, to go completely the opposite direction, I'm hoping that I can do a vinyl box set. But when we do that, what I might do is include DVDs with all the Atmos mixes as well.
So thank you so much for all the for these insights. I really enjoyed listening to that, and I think I learned a lot. I hope I have a chance to play around with this microphone array from Jungkook Lee.
One thing I did want to mention is there is a project called Echo that Jungkook Lee put together, where I was really lucky to just sit in the control room for this. We went to Air Studios and recorded an orchestra playing 4 pieces, once in a standard orchestra setup across the front, and once actually wrapped around the live room. And there were 11 immersive arrays, plus binaural, plus a second or third order ambisonic mic. So there were well over 100 microphones. And all of the recordings, it's going to be an open source project. So when they're done sifting through all the recordings, that'll all be available online. So it's the Echo project. So have a look at that. And on the website now are details of all of the microphone arrays that were used. And so the one I used is the PCMA 3D. And that's one of the arrays that he brought. But I have to say, he decided, because of the size of the room, to use omnis on the left, center, right, instead of cardioid or wide cardioid, which is what he used on the organ recital. And it wasn't as good. So, and he admits it. So, but it's fascinating to hear. Morten Lindberg had his array. So all of the people at the very forefront of immersive recording set up their microphones and recorded the exact same source material at the same time. Really amazing.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. The Echo project was definitely very interesting. I heard about it because some of my colleagues were also in the room here from the European music team, and I was a little bit jealous because I was in Berlin back then, so I couldn't hear it. But I will definitely check out the files once they are online. Yeah, thanks so much. I learned really a lot. I thought this was a really interesting session. Yeah, Ben, over to you, maybe for the final words.
Yeah, thank you, David. Andrew, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your session and your wisdom with our viewers. We're going to pop links in for everything that we've talked about. And again, like the results on House in the Woods are just incredible, man. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And we're going to now get into Q&A. So if you haven't yet, please add your questions for Andrew, David, and Greg. And we'll get into that now. All right, let's jump into Q&A now. Thanks, everybody, for all the great pre-submitted questions. A few we answered in the chat in real time, and a few we'll address here as well. Andrew, going to combine a couple of questions and start with you. So bear with me as I kind of ask you 3 at once here, my friend.
Yeah.
Starting with Thor's question, he would like to know more about your bus structure and layout when it comes to aux sends for reverbs, delays, and the like. Are you setting up a separate send for each stem group, such as guitars, keys, drums? And are the sends 712 or another format? So that's part 1. And then Jean-Philippe asks, how do you choose which track you feed the bed or the objects? That's followed by Alex asking, I'm curious to know how you're processing your Atmos mixes these days. Are you using any multi-channel tools for dynamics control across your beds and objects? Or do you mostly apply processing on the stem level? And I'm going to add to that Jay's question. Can you elaborate on the idea of sticking to the walls and why that is effective? So,
yeah,
you, sir.
All right. So just give a really, really brief description of how my Atmos mixes are set up. The first thing is almost all the time I'm doing an Atmos mix of something that has already been mixed in stereo and has been mastered. So I'm not doing it from scratch from the multi-track because that's just not the way the workflow is. So most of my source material is stems, and if I've done the stereo mix, I'm bouncing everything out. I think I've talked about it in the video. So my mix template is I have 4 916 mix buses, basically, one for each of the Dolby headphone settings, so off, near, mid, and far. And that allows me to very, very quickly keep everything about what I've already done with the source in terms of where it's panned, inserts, and all of that, and just flip between the distance settings without having to go to individual objects on everything. Which brings us to the why things go in objects or beds. Because all of my mix buses are 916, what I have is every output of the 916 bus is an object that's placed exactly on a speaker. And I don't even have 6 speakers up top. I only have 4. But by having all 6, what it means is when it's played back on a system that does have 6 speakers up top, if it's in the middle, it'll actually come out of the top center speaker instead of being a phantom from the left, right, or front, back. So 99% of my stuff is not necessarily going to move. It might be auto panning or a little bit, but if I do anything where a source is going to move, then that's when I go into objects. Because by panning in an object bed, you are burning in phantom images, which you don't want to do, because if you do it with an object, then the phantom gets made as playback happens based on what speakers are actually in the room. So that's my rule. If I'm finding a spot for it, it's in one of my object beds. If it's moving, it's going to be in an object. Sends to effects. I have very few multi-channel sends to anything other than Spanner, which is a multi-input, multi-output panner, which I use for some really amazing effects with automation and things. And then that automation gets copied to objects and blah, blah, blah. But for reverbs and delays, usually the sends are either stereo or mono. So I've got lots of effects which are set up either as stereo in, multi-channel out, or stereo in, and then there are 3 stereo effects for front, sides, and rear, and they're slightly different settings. And because those have different stereo inputs for each of the 3, I can either send to all 3, or I can weight the send of that effect to anywhere in the room I want to either have the effect follow it or not. And then I've got something which I absolutely love, which is, I call it a pinpoint reverb, where it's a mono send into a 916 or 906 multi-mono reverb. So wherever I pan the send, that is exactly where the reverb is. So rather than trying to get an immersive reverb, I'm trying to get a spot reverb that I can put anywhere in the room without having to pan the return. I'm just panning the send. So I can have it follow main pan or not. Okay, there's that. The sticking to the wall is all about the phantom image. So if you have audio going to a speaker, it comes out of one place. As soon as you're between speakers, now you have a phantom image, which is why I'm 916 instead of what my setup is, which is 914. The idea of coming off the walls, what it really means is you're just involving more speakers in a phantom image. So it can be incredibly effective, but I wouldn't want to just put things there. So static stuff that's building the mix, I leave on the walls and usually in speakers. There's no point in having something a little bit in front of the side speakers when it's going to work perfectly in the side speakers. So probably 80 or 90% of my stuff is coming out of single speakers in the 916 setup. Once you come off the walls, while it can be amazing when you're somewhere in the middle when you're listening, it can also make the balance weird when you're in a weird part of the room. Whereas if you only have stuff placed on the walls, the listening position gets a little bit bigger, I've found. And there was one other part of that question that I forgot, but I think I got to most of it.
I think you did. You nailed it. Thank you for sharing that. Great questions. Thanks for everyone who sent those in. Sticking with you, Andrew, Anna asks, she says she would like to know more about phase checking and issues, especially in drums when mixing in Atmos.
Okay, so this is a really important thing that'll also answer 9 million questions. I start and end every single Atmos mix in headphones. So phase issues, that would be the same sort of thing that you would have in stereo. You're combining lots of signals that are one instrument, and they were in one acoustic space if you're talking about drum mics. And how you do that in stereo will affect the phase relationships between the microphones and obviously in the room as well. I would not go looking for phase issues on individual sources. If you've got phase issues, then either it's the recording and you should fix it exactly the same way you would in stereo, or it's something that needs to be aligned in your room. The time alignment of the speakers means at the listener position, if there's a phase issue, it's a problem in the recording. It has nothing to do with immersive mixing. And a way to hear that really well would be go listen in stereo on headphones, and you should hear this phase problem in the source. If you don't hear it in headphones in stereo, but you hear it in the room, either there's something weird about your room, or just put those together. Don't split up the things that sound phasey, and then you've taken care of it.
Awesome. Thank you. Julio asks Andrew, when working with remote clients, what is your preferred method and delivery format? And to what extent do you get involved with the setup of your clients' playback methods?
I try not to be involved because then it's my fault. I've got a 2-page PDF that I send every time I do an Atmos mix. The first page is more creative stuff, and the second page is all just explaining the format. So what I do when I send a mix, I send the ADM, hoping they can get in front of some speakers. That would be amazing. I send the Dolby Binaural render, and I send an MP4, which has the Apple Spatial render. And I have very specific instructions on how to listen to them. I've been using Samply for delivering the MP4s and the binaurals, because if you listen in the Apple browser, it uses the head tracking. It's by far the simplest way. Otherwise, in the PDF, it talks about using the Files app and all the other ways you can listen with the head tracking. And then on some projects where I know that the artist can't get in front of speakers, but I know that they're actually going to listen, and they're going to listen hard to it, I will use Virtuoso by APL, which was developed by Hyunkuk Lee, who we talked about in the video, developed a microphone array, to do a binaural render, but it's not made to be the one that will be streamed. It's made to be another simulation of being in a room with speakers, so that there are two options, and one of those hopefully they'll externalize a little bit more, because some people, I have huge trouble externalizing. So by having two of them and being able to go back and forth, sometimes that'll help.
Awesome, thank you. Greg, over to you from Merrick here. What are the minimum room dimensions for Dolby Atmos mixing?
Yeah, so we've obviously gone over this a few times, but just as a quick one, and I'll do it in meters. So minimum,
it's our friends in Poland.
Yeah, that's where the question came from. So minimum layout in terms of height, you're looking at 2.4 meters. And these are recommended guidelines. We've talked about little tolerance in terms of if you have a room that's a little bit smaller or a little bit different. These are the general room size considerations. So 2.4 meters for height, 3.5 meters for length, and then for the layout width, you're looking at 5.5 meters. What's recommended height is actually 3 meters, and recommended layout length is 6.4. So the minimum you're looking at is 2.4 on your height, 3 meters on your width, and 3.5 on your length. Now, I am going to put a link in the chat to everyone that goes to our best practices guidelines, so everybody can have that.
And
Cool.
My room is basically the minimum. I'm in a tiny room and 914, and it works great. If you're smart about a little bit of acoustic treatment and making sure that the speakers are time aligned, it'll work in a really small room.
Yeah. Awesome. And we've done a couple of community sessions on, flexible solutions and rooms of different sizes. So if you go back to our YouTube playlist, you can check some of those out, including ones with Genelec and our friends at Haverstick and Focal as well. All right, David and Greg, question from Raul. I have a 714 Dolby setup and recently started mixing in Atmos. While I'm improving, I want to study how other mix engineers are working, especially by listening to Atmos content on platforms like Apple Music, Netflix, or Prime Video. After extensive research, it seems there's no reliable way to play back true Atmos mixes on a PC or Mac without purchasing an AVR separately or going to a movie theater. Is there any way to study professional Atmos mixes in full quality on my 714 setup without needing additional hardware? I'm aware of the binaural option with AirPods, but it feels like a downgrade compared to my system.
There's actually since about 2 years now, so since macOS Maverick, Apple has at least built in a good solution for macOS. So I'm not aware of a good solution on PCs at the moment. But on macOS, what you can do is you go to your audio MIDI setup. You need a core audio driver with at least 12 outputs, of course. So this is your audio interface where you have your speakers connected. You select that driver in the audio MIDI settings and you go to configure speakers and you select, or you basically tell your macOS that this is a 7.1.4 device. So you can click on configure speakers and then in the drop-down menu, you can actually select 714. And what this will do is then you have to select that as your playback device in macOS. And then if you restart Apple Music, it will start outputting 714 to your speakers. There's a little thing to be aware of. There's a little annoying bug. So if your driver has more than 16 outputs, like 17 or 20 or like 50, like the Avid interfaces, then it reverts back to 5.1. So that's a little bit annoying. So basically it works if you have between 12 and 16 outs. So there's a little workaround, which is a software called Loopback. It's about $100. If you download that software, you can basically build a virtual driver with 16 outputs, connect that to your actual driver, and this way you get a very stable Apple Music playback. I know many people who do that. We are actually, oh, perfect. You're just screen sharing it. Perfect. And so we are actually currently working on a knowledge base article to explain that because it's a really frequently asked question. So watch out. I think we will put this into the professionalsupport.dolby.com knowledge base soon.
Awesome. Thank you. Andrew, over to you for one from Ellis. How do you prevent the down mixes in the renderer from clipping?
Well, you have to deliver the ADM at minus 18 LUFS, and that is measuring the 5.1 down mix. So they just don't. I mean, yeah, I don't think I've ever clipped one. And if I did, I don't mind. But yeah, no one's ever complained about it. So if you're at minus 18 on the 5.1, it would be pretty difficult to clip. That said, very, very quiet verses, very loud choruses, you could be clipping, but I've never had anything come back to me because of that.
Awesome. Thank you. Sticking with you, one from Buzz. Have you done any recordings with the intention or focus to present it in Atmos from the beginning?
Well, we talked quite a bit about the string recordings, but in terms of a full production, no, but it's always in my head now. Even while I'm mixing in stereo, if it's not something that I produced, I am always thinking about what I'm going to be able to do. And I've really found that obviously recording immersively on certain things is incredible, but that you can still make the most compelling immersive experience out of stereo stems if the song lends itself to it. And it's so much more about the music than the source material sometimes. It really is. So I would like to do more, but at the moment, even with stereo productions, I'm not having an issue making it work. But there are a few people actually making records from day one that are meant to be immersive, like Justin Gray recorded an entire record. I mean, it took him forever, but every single thing he recorded was done immersively.
Yep. Shout out to Justin, and hope to have him on a session soon. Okay. I think, Andrew, you touched on this a little bit in the presentation, but Albert is asking, do you have a real-time monitoring solution for Apple's spatial audio processing of the Atmos mix?
Yeah, Audio Movers makes an app, and that's it. So I've got SoundFlow controlling switching, so I don't have to keep switching to the Apple I'm working. But yeah, it works great.
Cool. Thomas asks, do you and your clients consider it necessary to deliver separate mixes intended for delivery to headphones as well as loudspeaker-based listening systems? And I think we've touched on this a little bit, but feel free to elaborate if you'd like.
Yeah, definitely not. The speaker mix is the master. always, and everything else is derived from it. And that's the ADM is the file that will be around later when things change in terms of how stuff is encoded to headphones. So just like back in the day when MP3 started, there were people who would say, well, I'll do a mix for MP3 because of the way it changes it from the WAV file. And I personally don't like doing that. I make sure that I spend a lot of time in headphones making sure it works, but I also don't compromise the speaker version at all. So the speaker version is the file, but I'm absolutely positive that the headphone versions are compelling.
Great, thank you. Nicholas asks, can you talk about some panning techniques in general for Atmos mixing? I'm not sure if anybody would like to jump in on that one, but feel free if you'd like to take it, Andrew.
I mean, I think it's more about, well, one thing is realizing that if lots of stuff is moving, it's distracting and it's hard to listen to the song. So I try not to do too much active panning, but some of the tools like the Dolby Music Panner, awesome. It works in time with the song and you draw whatever you want. So to have this free step sequencer thing is insanely cool. Spanner, which I mentioned before, multi-input, multi-output. So I can take a 7/0, let's say, circle of background vocals and spin them and bring them up and down and things like that. So I think it's choosing the elements that you're going to pan and then finding the tools. There are so many good. There's the energy panner, which only moves when there's level. There's the brightness panner. There are a lot of different tools out there. And I think it's really just a matter of musically deciding what you're going to use. But yeah, go nuts and then be honest about whether you're making yourself nauseous.
Well said. Nice, thanks. All right, a couple more here before we wrap, and I think you touched on this a little bit, but I'm gonna ask Julian's question here. When listening on headphones, do you mostly listen to the Dolby Renderer binaural, or do you use something like Audio Movers to also hear spatial audio? That's part one. But two, how do you feel about something like APL's Virtuoso for headphone monitoring as a substitute?
I think that Virtuoso is awesome. I am very aware that that is not a delivery format, so I will spend most of my time listening to Dolby Binaural because the workflow is so easy and I'm very used to it. And because I'm choosing distance settings, which of my object beds things are going to go into. And obviously that's only reflected in the Dolby Binaural. I definitely check the Apple Spatial, but that's more of towards the end of the process, not completely at the end because I don't want to be surprised, but the Dolby Binaural most of the time in headphones. And Virtuoso is what I use when I'm traveling, when I'm doing a recall on something. And I just want, like I was saying before, just another way to hear what it would be like in speakers. It's just a very different approach to what Dolby's doing. And it's based on different input. So it doesn't follow the distance settings, but it gets a 714. So yeah, it's a great alternative. And I think especially if you don't have a great room to be able to mix in on speakers, it's fantastic, but it is not a delivery format. So you want to keep that in mind. You can't say it sounds great through Virtuoso. It's not that great in the Dolby Binaural. It's totally cool. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it has to be the other way around because there are people who are listening to the Dolby Binaural.
Great, thanks. Okay, from Luke, Andrew, what headphones have you found are your preference, and any specific reason why?
Well, I'm using the Odyssey LCD MX4s, and I, for years, used the cheap Sony MDR 7506s, and they're great, and I love them. But I just found when I really started doing a lot more Atmos that there's enough weirdness in the frequency response of those headphones that it was messing with the timbre changes that happen, especially as you pan with height. And so I spent years at trade shows, and Chris Barron's at Odyssey was awesome and just let me keep going to the booth and hogging headphone amps. And after about 2 years, I stuck with this pair, and it's been great. And they're also really heavy, which some people hate. And for me, it's like super comfortable. It's like someone's hugging your head all day.
Nice. Last question from Mark, and I think we may have published a link to this already, but can you share a picture of the microphone array you used on the strings?
I don't have a picture handy. At the Echo project, which we posted a link to.
Posted a link.
Yep.
There are diagrams of every single one of the arrays, and the one I'm using is one of the 2 arrays that Hyung-Kook Lee has put in there. It's the PCMA 3D. It's 704. It's all Scheps capsules. It's a 1 meter square, coincident microphones. So yeah, there's a diagram and a bunch of recordings. I recommend that every single person here at least check out some of those files, because you'll hear the exact same source being recorded at the same time with over 100 microphones. It's the only time I think I'll ever be able to hear those options. So it's absolutely worth checking out.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And with that, we will wrap this session. Andrew Scheps, man, thank you so much for your time and wisdom here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. David Ziegler, Greg Chin, thanks, guys. Much appreciated.
Thank you all. Appreciate you all. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.